Making a good movie is hard to do, but translating a video game into a good movie is somehow way harder, because the two mediums are different in ways that many people might not always fully appreciate. Between these differences and the fact that the people in charge might not even know enough about the games they're trying to convert, there exist a lot of vectors for it to go wrong, which is why it pretty much always does. It wasn't until just a few years ago that video game movies finally started to show an ounce of promise, but even now, a video game movie is never a guarantee. People have been trying and failing and sometimes succeeding to make video game movies for decades now, and there are so many variables and examples to consider when discussing such a broad topic that I'm not even sure where the best place to start is. So how about we play it safe and start at the beginning? The original Super Mario Bros. Movie is widely considered to be one of the worst video game adaptations ever made, but at the same time, some people have retrospectively reflected positively on the movie, praising it for its artistic liberty and practical effects. Super Mario Bros. Is probably one of the most challenging types of games to convert into a film, and that is simply because it's not a story-driven game, much like most games from that era. If you were lucky, maybe a JRPG or something like Ninja Gaiden or Zelda would have a story, but it was generally treated as superfluous in the face of gameplay. Even today, any Mario game that isn't Paper Mario, Mario & Luigi, or Super Mario Galaxy 1 has just about no story to tell at all. A typical Mario story is generally very default and not super audacious. You got a silent protagonist who eats too much spaghetti. There's a big angry smelly guy who breathes fire. You have a grown woman who doesn't know where babies come from.
Mama, Peach, I'm your mama?
Hey Peach, with all due respect, are you broken? It's the bare minimum of what you could call a story, because for the kind of games the mainline Marios tend to be, you don't really need a story because the game is so goddamn fun. Don't get me wrong, it's really cool when it's there, but most Marios have nothing more to prove when you consider the gameplay. Now, movies don't have gameplay, so you can't use that excuse. So how do you take a man jumping on mushrooms and turtles to save a princess from a turtle dragon guy, none of whom have a truly fleshed out backstory to speak of, and turn it into a screenplay? Well, you follow Daisy from Super Mario Land instead, and you make her a human baby that came from an egg because she's also a lizard or something. Then you make Bowser a lizard-human hybrid and turn him into a mob boss of an underground cyberpunk society in the sewers of New York that's also an alternate dimension where riot cops drag people into unmarked vans for singing songs against the government. Now, when you put it like that, it sounds bonkers and honestly spectacular, and maybe it would have worked a little bit better if the Goombas didn't look like this. I've always believed that even the best premise can be squandered with poor delivery, and also that the worst premise can be carried by fantastic delivery. And depending who you ask, this movie might be much of the first situation. I think in my case though, I actually kinda like it. It's weird and goofy, it's not something you see every day. The characters are fun, it's got a lot of slapstick comedy and some funny dialogue. I really do think it's worth at least one watch. But the single biggest problem is that nothing about it says Mario. There is very little about this movie that bears any resemblance to any of the games. Check out this funky dude playing the guitar. Of course, you know who that's supposed to be, right? Well, obviously, that's Toad. Faithfulness to the source material. This is very important for a video game adaptation, and this is where Mario failed in many respects. Despite the movie having a lot of things going for it, there's an element of childlike whimsy and silliness that was implicit in the Mario universe at the time that isn't quite replicated in the movie. The thing is, gamers want to see the magic of the games translated onto the big screen in some way or another, but even in the best case scenarios, there is an understanding that it won't be one-to-one with the game. That's just not how it works. But if you just got done adapting a game to a movie/TV show and then you tell me, yeah, none of us looked at the game, I'm gonna be like, bitch. The Halo TV showrunners claim that they didn't look at the games at all and that they focused on Halo's supplementary media such as the books, which wouldn't be so bad except that the grand majority of Halo fans are fans of the games, not the books. I mean, this is gamers we're talking about, right? Most of us can't even read. I understand the Halo games might not always have the most fleshed out stories if you assess them in a vacuum.
Get on the fucking pelican!
To that end, I could understand if they read the books in addition to playing the games, but to completely disregard the games altogether demonstrates a complete lack of respect for the source material, at least I think. I feel like a lot of these movies and TV shows tend to sacrifice faithfulness to the source material in favor of making something that can appeal to a broader audience that includes people who haven't played the game to begin with, except because those people haven't played the games, they don't give a shit about the movie/TV show anyway, so it's this incredibly ironic situation where these wise guys end up placating an audience that doesn't exist. It's a lose-lose. If you created a Venn diagram of people who would be likely to watch a Halo TV show and people who would love the Halo games, then surprise bitch, you just drew a circle. But if you add people who don't know anything about Halo and maybe never even heard of it, well that's just another circle. Just way over there. I haven't used Venn diagrams in forever, so bear with me. These days, games that are heavily cinematic already are much more common than ever, which on paper makes the idea of translating a game to a movie at least a little more straightforward. Uncharted is a great example, where the original games are like 50% cutscenes or climbing segments where you push up on the control stick, which have so little gameplay they might as well be a cutscene. And when most of your game is already cutscenes, the process, at least I imagine, becomes putting your own spin on those cutscenes in live action. You know, deciding what's worth bringing over, what should be omitted, what should be added, and stringing it together into something resembling the actual games while still being original. This seems to have been the vague thought process for the Uncharted movie. It literally opens on that iconic scene from Uncharted 3 where Nathan's hanging onto a string of luggage hanging out of a plane. The Uncharted movie is like a collection of various scenes from all the games loosely strung together into something original. It isn't groundbreaking by any means. The games were originally very much an Indiana Jones style romp, meaning that the movie is less good Indiana Jones in many respects, but it's still a fun time, especially if you're a fan of Uncharted. It does a surprisingly decent job at recapturing the spirit of the games despite not being completely one-to-one. There's even a Nolan North cameo in there. Some things were a little bit weird. I mean, I refuse to believe they couldn't find a better guy to play Sully than Mark Wahlberg, but it largely does what it's supposed to do, and it's still a fun movie, at least I think. But you want to know what isn't a fun movie? Doom. Not all video games lend themselves well to movies, and I think Doom is a great example of this. The story is famously simplistic, John Carmack himself even insisting at the time that story in video games isn't really that important. What's funny about that is that John Carmack actually said he likes the Doom movie, which I don't really get, but he's the man, I guess, so, you know, it's not really my place to question him about Doom. Doom's entire identity is basically a potluck of heavy metal subcultures and scary movies that Johnny and Johnny loved as kids. That's why half the music is just a ripoff of Metallica, and every level looks like a highly pixelated cover art from a Cannibal Corpse album. Doom is not a profound, narratively driven game, it's a metal album converted into a video game. And even almost 30 years later, it's fun as hell. So how do you turn that into a movie? Well, the answer is to turn it into the most generic-ass piece of crap action movie you'll ever see. If you've seen any $5 shitbox bargain bin at Best Buy action movie with guns and helicopters and explosions that's probably on Netflix with 3 viewers, you've already experienced just about everything this movie has to offer before it even started, which wouldn't be so bad if the delivery of that premise was good, but spoiler alert, it's not. Doom is an aggressively boring movie, at least I think. For a movie based on a game with almost no story, there is just way too much talking, way too much time spent telling the viewer in detail what's happening and why. In the original Doom game, you would shoot through 12 levels and then it'd give you a wall of text as you go to the next chapter, and then you'd shoot through 12 more and repeat until the game is over. The movie, by comparison, I feel is like 68% talking and 32% the actual fun stuff. Doom was incredibly saturated from the standpoint of action, so what a Doom movie should be is something with heavily de-emphasized dialogue and more shooting. I don't think that's impossible to do. It is worth noting that some of the things I read suggested that it's trying to loosely follow Doom 3, which, if you know me, you know that I don't really like that one. Why'd they choose Doom 3 instead of the fun ones? I don't know. The only part that really screams Doom are the first-person shooting segments near the end, and also there's this guy named Pinky and this dude named after Carmack, but other than that, You could have called this movie Space Shoot Boys from Hell and nobody would argue with you. Doom and Mario show that filling in the gaps of a minimalistic narrative is tricky, but what's possibly even more tricky is taking a game with a hugely ambitious, sprawling narrative that might last for tens of hours and shaving it down to fit the runtime of a movie. The Final Fantasy games are built upon big-ass, sprawling storylines with tons of plot twists and convoluted stuff, and right when you think you figured it out, they make a 50-part remake that adds time travel or something. I think even attempting to turn something like that into a movie deserves applause. I don't care what anyone says. But on the topic of sprawling, plot-twisty, convoluted storylines, supposedly, a Metal Gear Solid movie has been in the works for some time, even though we know absolutely nothing about it at this point, other than the fact that Oscar Isaac is going to be Snake. Metal Gear Solid 1 alone has 3 hours of cutscenes, and that doesn't even include all the codec conversations full of important character moments and exposition. On top of all that, you have to convert the actual gameplay moments to the movie scenes as well. There are so many details and important moments in MGS1 that if you were to make an uncompromising Metal Gear Solid 1 movie, it would have to be a 2-part thing, which is funny because the original game came on 2 discs. Again, compromises will almost definitely need to be made in any situation to convert a game to a movie, but the question is, how many compromises can you make while still retaining its identity? Metal Gear has a very distinctive style of storytelling, and it's entirely possible that this could get lost when turning it into a film. Not everybody loves Kojima's 20-minute TED Talk approach to storytelling, but if that Metal Gear movie comes out and Otacon doesn't go into a monologue about how he uses slice-of-life anime to cope with the guilt of being born into a family of weapons scientists, I don't know if I could still call it Metal Gear.
It's just like one of my Japanese animes!
I am concerned that with the subject matter Metal Gear delves into vis-a-vis military war stuffs, it could be at risk of further compromise and censorship. Speaking of military, remember the Monster Hunter movie? No. Okay, full disclosure, I have never played any of the Monster Hunter games, but I'm pretty sure it takes place in some fantasy anime land on a plane of existence that is completely divorced from the real world and the US military. I remember when this movie came out, and never in my life had I been so disappointed by something that I didn't really care about in the first place. I expected nothing, and I was still heartbroken. For whatever reason, these guys often seem to neglect the source material when making movies based on video games, perhaps because there are a bunch of 48-year-old executives calling the shots behind the scenes. Today we still have 40-something dudes calling the shots, except a 40-something dude in the year 2022 was probably like 12 when Sonic the Hedgehog first came out, which might be why the Sonic the Hedgehog movies are actually surprisingly competent. They're not perfect, you still have the worn out premise of CG character comes to the real world and sits in a car with some douchebag nobody cares about, there's a disproportionate focus on human characters that aren't Eggman, and it definitely was made with younger audiences in mind. I did feel a little bit out of place when I saw it in the theater. There were all these 10-year-olds with their moms, but the delivery of that premise within the family-friendly framework was actually pretty good. These are very entertaining, crowd-pleasing movies, and Jim Carrey as Robotnik is really weird, but somehow it works anyway. And I love Agent Stone, man. He's just the best. I love him. Much like the Mario movie, it seems like a movie that they actually cared about in spite of its flaws, but unlike the Mario movie, it has enough respect for the source material to not stray way too far from it. Sonic vs. Eggman's Robot Army. That's what it's all about. Then the sequel comes out. Now we have the Sonic Heroes team, and they even brought in Colleen O'Shaughnessy, who has been voicing Tails in the game since 1911-12. To me, these movies struck a great balance between having enough there to please the fans while also placating a more broad and general audience. Would I have preferred something that was literally just for fans? Probably, but you could do way worse than this. And then you have Detective Pikachu, based loosely on the game from 2016. I'm not sure if I like this more than Sonic, but I have a lot more respect for it because it trusts that the audience is already familiar with Pokemon. There's no time wasting with Pikachu falling from some dimension into the real world and some guy in a car trying to get them acquainted with Walmart or something. It takes place in a Pokemon world. The legitimacy of Pokemon in this universe is held to be self-evident, and it doesn't need to justify any of it to the audience. Again, it does have younger audiences in mind, and it does try to use Ryan Reynolds to bring in a wider audience of preps and posers, but at least it's still a movie all about Pokemon. And also, I think there's a joke about cocaine in there, but I might not be remembering that right. On the other hand, the idea of Pikachu as a detective trying to solve the mystery of a guy's missing father is really unique and out there, and far more interesting than any premise the anime movies could come up with. And the fact that they created this realistic Pokemon world with underground fight clubs and deep-rooted mass media conspiracies and whatnot, that is insanely cool. I guess what I'm really trying to get at with this video is, if you want to make a video game movie, you just gotta make it good. If you make the thing, okay? If you make a thing, and you make it good, and you don't fuck it up, then we're all gonna have a fun time. Now tell me, what's your favorite video game movie? And what games do you want to see turned into movies? Please leave an essay in the comments complete with MLA formatted citations, or you're getting an F and I'm telling your mom. Bye guys.